for someone to get through past the cabin crew through a locked reinforced door, overpower two pilots, remove a pilot from the seat, get in, turn the gear off, disengage the autopilot and start a turn within 2 minutes? Absolutely impossible. That military radar observed was done at 35 degrees angle of bank, which meant that it had to be done manually. 2 minutes after the captain said goodnight, the ACARS, the transponder, everything was switched off.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience from around the globe. This is your host, Sid, and welcome back to another episode of Sit Down with Sid podcast, where we bring people together one conversation at a time. A quick note before we begin. MH370 remains a complex mystery with many conflicting theories. The views expressed by our guests are their own. Our goal is to provide a platform for various perspectives as we continue to piece together the story. Joining us today is Captain Byron Bailey, a veteran commercial and corporate jet pilot with over 45 years of experience in the cockpit. Captain Bailey has flown everything from fighter jets to the Boeing 777, and he has become one of the most prominent technical voices in the search for MH370 since 2014. Through his columns and investigative work, he has challenged the status quo, advocating for a search based on the controlled flight theory. Captain Byron, you have spent tens of thousands of hours in the sky, and you have dedicated a significant portion of your career to ensuring that the 239 souls aboard MH370 are not forgotten. It is a profound honor for me to have you on our show, and thank you for taking the time.
It's my pleasure, Sid. If I can only help, we have to find this missing airplane. Yeah.
12 years later, we are still talking about it. Captain Byron, so to start us off, could you tell our audience who are meeting for the first time a little bit about your professional background in aviation and what was that moment that drew your attention to the MH370 disappearance?
Yes. Well, I started off in the military. I had 16 years military. I was a fighter pilot. And incidentally, I was based for 2 years up in northern Malaysia in a fighter base near Penang, and we were flying across northern Malaysia and the Straits of Malacca a lot. So I know the area very well. After I left the Air Force, I flew for 3 airlines and ended up a captain with Emirates flying Airbus and then Boeing 777. And then I flew often into Kuala Lumpur and across the Indian Ocean. So I know that area very well. When I retired from Emirates, which in my opinion is the world's best airline, I got a job back in Australia flying corporate jets because the rich and famous like experience up the front. They don't want young guys learning as it is. But anyway, I'm still flying. My partner, she owns a private jet, and she does seminars around Australia, and she sells products in America as well. Called the brand is Cabo Health.
Liver doctor.
The liver doctor, yeah. Anyway, that's basically me. I'm happy. I play tennis and fly airplanes, so I'm doing all right.
Wow, what a great experience. What a great career you have. I want to talk about IGARI. You know, there has been such a lot of talk about IGARI, whether some say there was no turn. Some says there was a sharp turn between 30 to 35 degree banking angle. Now, as someone who currently flies, as you said, the jets, corporate jets, and has extensive experience with long-haul routes, what was your initial gut reaction to the news of that sharp turn of MH370 at IGARI?
Okay, I ended up flying a Boeing 777 simulator at the request of Sky News, which is shortly to become News 24. And in a Boeing 777 simulator, I flew that actual turn. Now, above 30,000 feet, all these modern jets go to half bank. So the turn would only be done at 15 degrees angle of bank. Yet the radius of turn that military radar observed was done at 35 degrees angle of bank, which meant that it had to be done manually because the autopilot wouldn't have done that. And the fact that the turn commenced about 2 minutes after the captain, which was unusual, the captain was doing the radio because he was the pilot flying, should have been the other guy. 2 minutes after the captain said goodnight, the ACARS, the transponder, everything was switched off. We know the transponder was switched off because it goes from the TARA setting through out only to this, to that. And briefly, it was recorded on analysis that the switch had been moved. It just hadn't failed. And then 2 minutes after the captain had said goodnight to Kuala Lumpur ATC, it commenced this turn. People say, oh, it could have been, someone forcing themselves into the flight deck and taking control. No. Just as a matter of side on this, in 96, I was flying a new Boeing 777 from Bangkok to Dubai at 4 o'clock in the morning over the Arabian Sea. An Arab passenger in first class went berserk and smashed through the locked door, grabbed me around the throat and demanded I land immediately. He was having a massive panic attack. So my Egyptian purser, who had trained as a boxer, he handled the situation very well and got Emirates Employee of the Year as a result. But the point is, after that incident, Boeing reinforced the door lock mechanism. So for someone to get through past the cabin crew through a lock reinforced door, overpower two pilots, remove a pilot from the seat, get in, turn the gear off, disengage the autopilot and start a turn within 2 minutes, absolutely impossible. So we can forget about an intrusion into the flight deck. Couldn't happen.
And as you said, the turn at IGARI was at a sharp 35 degrees banking angle, which can only be done manually. Now, for our listeners who are not, say, pilots, just like even myself, can you explain the level of sophistication required to disable the ACARS and the transponder while simultaneously hand flying the aircraft through the series of these complex turns?
Well, first off, I've got to mention the Boeing 777 is fly-by-wire. It has 80 computers. At any one time, it has 3 autopilots, 1 active and 2 on standby. And if one should fail, one of the others will step in and do it automatically. In terms of ACARS and transponder, all that, it's just a question of turning switch. That's all it requires to disable all that, to make it go dark, which means you disappear from civil radar. You don't disappear from military radar, but it was tracked by military radar, as we found out, right back across northern Malaysia, which I know well, but nothing was said about that for a couple of weeks. I mean, it was just, I don't know why they were holding back. And just I'll mention this, and interestingly, Tony Abbott, who was the Prime Minister at the time, and I have spoken to personally, he now admits it was murder-suicide by the captain. He came out in October 2019, finally admitted that he had been told 4 days after the disappearance of MH370 by the Malaysian Prime Minister that it was murder-suicide by the captain. And also 2 weeks later, then the military radar information about it coming back across Malaysia and flying up the Straits of Malacca and disappearing out to the northwest of Sumatra. I mean, it became so obvious. And I wrote in 2015 in The Australian, as their aviation journalist, that there needed to be a royal commission into what the hell was going on with the search. And anyway, we can continue.
Well, this is actually, it's the first time I'm hearing about Tony Abbott. So you were saying that the Malaysian government, after the 4 days, while they were still not sure, because the first few days, they were searching in the South China Sea, as per Captain Nick Ruslan, who was the chief pilot of Malaysian Airlines, who we had on the show, while they knew that the plane made a sharp banking left towards northwest. So, I mean, I find it very I don't know what to believe in this. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, I don't want to point a finger also at the American government, but I'm ex-military. It's still top secret stuff I'm not allowed to talk about. But when you look at the surveillance, SOSUS in the Atlantic and the underwater sensors for sonar, we've got airborne and space-based surveillance. And Pine Gap in Central Australia is linked with the NSA and CIA. For sure, America knew and tracked MH370. Otherwise, I mean, goodness gracious. And the other thing is 17 hours and 40 minutes after the Malaysian government issued the distress phase, which is search required for a missing airplane. 17 hours, 40 minutes after that was issued, 3 Poseidon P-8 aircraft took off from Diego Garcia, flew to northwest Sumatra, and turned south and flew the exact route that followed the flight plan of MH370. And then they returned to Diego Garcia, and the American government said nothing, and the search went on in the South China Sea with dozens of airplanes and scores of ships, and no one said anything. And it was only then after the Malaysian military radar, which I know well, I haven't operated with them, spoke up and said, yeah, we tracked it back across primary paint only, no transponder. And the Malaysian Prime Minister said, yes, it was obviously flown under pilot control. But the media, especially in Australia, wanted it all to be great mystery, and 150 books have been written, of which nearly all are garbage, So, yeah, it's interesting what goes on in the world with governments wanting to protect their ability, surveillance. See, what America, which is so advanced in terms of surveillance, it doesn't want the world to know it can do all this. And the other thing is the Australian government, they opened their over-the-horizon radar, it's called Jindalee, or Jawn, over-the-horizon radar, using first returning skyway with a skip distance. It ranges out to 3,000 kilometres. It became operational in 2005. Between then and now, it's still operating, looking over the Indian Ocean. But in that whole time, it's only ever been switched off once. And that happened to be the night of March the 8th, when MH370 was disappearing. What a coincidence. Well, it's a cover-up, for sure. There was another point I wanted to bring about that, but it'll slip me for the moment. But have you heard of WSPR, WSPR?
Yes, the WSPR Technology, yes.
Yeah, well, originally I planned, another colleague of mine who had been chief pilot of UK's largest airline, he separately planned, and other people, we all did our own analysis of the 7th satellite arcs, about Inmarsat and the 7th final arc, which is the final one, because after the aircraft turned around over IGARI, it flew for another 7 hours and 37 minutes. And that 7 arc is a vital scientific fact. And also at IGARI, we get a Doppler shift in the vertical plane, suggesting a sudden descent. I can talk more about that later, because in a Boeing 777 simulator, I demonstrated a glide of 100 miles. I also demonstrated the death dive, where engine flame out, you go in a spiral dive, no autopilot. We hit the water doing nearly 600 mile per hour. Would have exploded into thousands of bits of debris. But when they searched that area after a couple of weeks, there was no floating debris. So we think he ditched, but screwed up the ditching. But I can talk about that later.
No, that would be great. So
just at the beginning of 2016, Malcolm Turnbull blocked release, which my colleague Ian Higgins, who wrote the book I showed you earlier, and I'll show it again, he wrote the book about the cover-up. He requested under a Freedom of Information request the search documents pertaining to the initial search. It was blocked by the Australian Prime Minister. It is still blocked at taxpayers' expense by top-end of town lawyers. We can't get hold of it. So why is the Australian government blocking release of these documents? As well as that, the head of the Australian Transport Safety Bureau came out and threatened 2 years jail for anybody leaking information. Now, I happened to have had a co-pilot who was part of the search planning team, and when I rang him a couple of months after the aircraft went missing, saying, what on earth is going on with the search? Because they suddenly said Oh, it was the pilots were terminated over the South China Sea by a hypoxia event, which is rubbish, because most pilots are hypoxia trained now. Your time of useful consciousness is 30 to 60 seconds at 35,000 feet if you have a depressurization. I mean, and you're trained, you have your EROS oxygen mask, which you just grab and put on within seconds. And Ian Higgins and I did a video demonstrating this in the early days. But this whole thing, it just got very, very murky. So I could talk for hours and hours about all the sidebar issues of what the Australian government was doing, because this flight plan that the FBI obtained from the deleted flight plan that I was told about from my colleague who was a member of the search planning team and is now back flying, he told me about the flight plan. And when I wrote about it in the Australian, the Deputy Prime Minister accused me of false assertions, and the Australian Transport Bureau denied it existed for nearly 2 years until the FBI confirmed it. So they were just covering up. And that's the Australian government, yeah.
So, and do you mind showing the book to our audience? And if you, yes, okay. So if you don't mind showing so the hunt for MH370, and for our audience, this is available on Amazon, and we have the description. We have the link of the book in the description below. So feel free to read about it. And off the camera, Captain Byron, you were saying that Ian Higgins disappeared from the Earth in 2021 and nowhere to be found.
Well, I collaborated with Ian doing a lot of the information about Boeing 777 and that, and we sat down, and he was a good guy. He was the Australian, which is the biggest, most conservative newspaper in Australia. He was their top investigative journalist reporter. He went up to Malaysia. He was so deeply into it. He was so convinced the Australian government was covering it up. So I helped him with the book, and he was pushing for it. So in 2021, I suddenly was told Ian Higgins has disappeared. Well, it all went very quiet until 18 months ago they had a coronial inquest. So I offered to be a witness in the coronial inquest, and the counsel assistant coroner and inspector of police contacted me and said, we can't use you, our remit is too narrow. So I turned up with a co-pilot colleague with the only public in this almost secretive coronial inquest, and Her Honour the coroner, when she came in, spent 20 minutes informing that there was a suppression order, that none of the stuff that went on in this coronial inquest was allowed to be published. It was secret. Why? So anyway, the end result was, the official verdict was, it was probably suicide. But the only evidence they have is there was one ping from a tower, his mobile phone, at 3 o'clock in the morning, North Sydney Heads, where the cliffs are, back in, because the search, which originally, according to my informant that I'd mentioned earlier, a co-pilot of mine that was part of the search planning, he had told me that they had originally planned the search based on a pilot glide of 100 miles. But then when the search went ahead, it was subtly based on the assumption that the pilots had been terminated over the South China Sea, and the plane had meandered by itself for 7 hours and ended up in the South China, in the Southern Indian Ocean, which just doesn't make sense, because the pilot has to be in control, or the autopilot has to be in control. So dead pilots, and the autopilot will only do what is programmed, which meant if the pilot suddenly died, it would have flown itself to Beijing. So, yeah, it's all very, very iffy. So the lawyers prepared a case, and I submitted a claim to the Australian Federal Police against the Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss, who had been in charge of the initial search, and that he was dishonest under the Commonwealth Crimes Act, a politician being dishonest in public service. And the Australian Federal Police accepted the complaint and then did nothing. So here, all these years later, it's political correctness. They won't touch it. They won't touch it. It's too hot a potato.
Wow. Captain Byron, I want to talk about the seventh arc. I know you had initially brought it up. Now, given the sudden thought towards the seventh arc, do you believe the aircraft was flying on autopilot via programmed heading or LNAV mode, or does the data suggest a pilot was actively flying plane until the end, which was 7 hours and 36 minutes after the last ping on the radar?
Okay, my personal professional opinion is he could have been using heading modes as he came back across northern Malaysia and up the Straits of Malacca. But once he turned south, he had these waypoints that he had calculated from his flight plan he had done weeks earlier. And so what you do is you just, with the autopilot engaged, you just do a direct to the final waypoint. And with the lateral long-range navigation mode, the aircraft will just fly you there. So he can see towards the end of this, and Richard Godfrey, the aerospace engineer that a couple of years ago, using supercomputers and everything else, and I believe I've looked at his work, we're pretty sure that he flew it to about latitude 30 south, and then he entered basically a holding pattern. Now, originally myself, Mike Keane, the former chief pilot of UK's largest airline, other guys, we had calculated and based our planning on the fact that he flew the aircraft, the captain, as far as possible and then glided it as far as possible, which would have put him at 39 south. But it appears from the whisper technology that aerospace engineer Richard Godfrey has come up with is that at 30 south, he entered a holding pattern, and it was most likely it was dawn. Now, if you're going to ditch, you can't do it in the dark. And the ditching technique for a big aeroplane like that is to land along the swell into wind, more along the swell. If the wind is over about 30 knots, then it has to be more into wind. But for successful ditching, you don't want to go bang into a head-on swell. But anyway, it looks like he held until dawn where he had enough daylight to see the surface of the sea. And we know at that stage, going back, the information was the wind was about 240 degrees, 15 gusting 20, sea state 3 to 4 meters. So he tried, we think, to ditch along the swell, enough daylight to see what he was doing. He left the undercarriage up, flap down, which was torn off because top investigators have proved that the flap was actually in the lowered position. But we think he really then screwed up the actual ditching, became very hard, broke the airplane up into a few pieces, but it wasn't a crash. It was just a very sort of hard arrival ditching that wasn't totally successful. So that's my opinion. He was hand flying once he hit about 30 south. And we are pretty convinced that the aircraft is between 29 and 30 degrees south, about 50 nautical miles east of the seventh arc. Now, when the Australian government, Malaysian government, and we think the Saudi government was involved behind the scenes, got involved in May last year to say, yeah, we'll restart the search. And then they did it and didn't sign and so on. But it got going in February of this year. The contract was to search for 55 days and they would get $75 million if they found it. Well, Ocean Infinity, with their wonderful new ship, came out of Singapore, went down to 30 south. They passed 30 south, didn't search there, but went to 35 south, an area identified by the French aviation experts, and researched that area to fine-tune it. But that had been searched before. And then we thought, well, okay, next they're going to go up to 30 south and search the Whisper area where we're convinced the actual ditching occurred. Well, unfortunately, after refueling once in Fremantle, near Perth, Ocean Infinity then shot off to Pago Pago, American Samoa, 27 days into the search. And we're all confused, wondering what's going on. Then 2 weeks after the ship went off to Pago Pago, Ocean Infinity and the Malaysian government both said the search has concluded. And that's it, end of search. Now, either they did find it and are not saying anything and are waiting, or they just don't want to search the whisper area because they don't want it found, in the Malaysian government, that is, and the Australian government. So I don't know. What do you say? One other thing too, I did mention about the American government sending 3 search planes within 24 hours after disappearance to search that area. Well, an Emirates A380 Airbus, the biggest airplane in the world, en route Melbourne to Dubai, passed through that area 24 hours after, in the early hours of the morning, after MH370 had been through. The Captain Martin Smith noticed an airplane passing close by with no transponder, unknown to air traffic control. Turns out it was one of the American Poseidon search aircraft. America said nothing. Martin Smith reported at air traffic control on Emirates. It just died because, pilots not allowed to say anything when you work for an airline. But when he retired, he then came forward a few months ago and brought out the fact that he had seen this aircraft in proximity. So all the dots are clicking together that this is a massive cover-up by the Malaysian government to avoid liability, the Australian government that wants to protect social cohesion by the Saudi government perhaps behind the scenes pouring a lot of money in, and American government on the sidelines just not wanting to be involved. So that's our feeling.
I want to talk about debris. I have 2 questions regarding the debris. Number one, regarding the Flaperon and other parts that were found, what do those specific pieces tell a veteran pilot about the aircraft's final configuration? Was it flaps up or was it flaps down?
Flaps were down. Larry Vance, who a Canadian top investigator, he did the Swiss Air MD-11 Nova Scotia that crashed.
I'm not.
Yeah, and it hit the water at a certain, fairly high speed. But he said there were hundreds of thousands of bits of debris floating around. He analysed the technical analysis of the flap and the flaperon, the way, the structure, and the marks, everything suggests they were torn off from the lower position. The other interesting thing is, if you're ditching a wind 240, 15, 20 knots, and the swell coming up from Antarctica, it radiates from the south, it means that you'd be ditching, you try and hit the high back end of the swell when you're ditching. It would mean that the right engine and the right flap, everything else, would hit the water first and be torn off. And that's what we think happened. When they do discover eventually the wreckage, they'll find the engines first, I think, because they're the size of a small bus, and the undercarriage are big metal parts. But the sonar that Ocean Infinity uses with its 8 autonomous drones and a master drone, that can search massive area, pick up an object even a meter deep at 6,000 meters, a meter in size at 6,000 meters. So if they searched in the right area, they'll find it. And the other thing is, there's been so much media sort of conspiracy rubbish that you can't trust the media. Only the Australian, in my opinion, Sky News, have been 100% publishing facts only. So, yeah. And the books that have been written, some of them are absolute garbage. I see you had Christine Negroni.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I had a chat with her. Her book about the fact that she suggests the co-pilot was partially hypoxic and wanted to. I said to her, that's rubbish. And she said, don't be rude. And I said, the truth is not rude. And she hung up on me. But a lot of people have made a lot of money out of conspiracy theories, and it's still going on. Wacky theories, you know, that the aircraft could have been controlled from the ground, or, you know, the Americans didn't want certain people to arrive in China.
I have a question about you, the BTO, which is the burst timing offset, and the BFO, the burst frequency offset data. Many
Yeah.
researchers have struggled with it. In your view and experience, is the satellite handshake data the ultimate smoking gun, or is there any room for misinterpretation?
The fact that, getting back to the Inmarsat data, best way for me to describe it, I flew a 777-300 out of Singapore for Melbourne. When you hit the Indonesian flight information reading boundary, you have to be above 24,000 feet after departing Singapore. Otherwise, you're trapped down at low level for quite a while, and that means you burn a lot more fuel. I was looking at my top of climb sort of banana, as it's called, on my flight display, thinking, gee, it's hot, I'm heavy, very heavy, 300 plus tons. I'm not going to make it. And I'm in full climb thrust. And I thought, damn it. And so I hid in the computer, and there's three of them controlling every little length. I selected max continuous power. And of course, with the additional surge of thrust, I managed to make my 24,000 feet. Rolls-Royce in London contacted Emirates and said, why is the captain using maximum continuous power? That's real-time monitoring, and that's what you get with these modern jets if you pay for the subscription service for the engine coverage. Malaysia, El Cheapo airline, they didn't have the coverage. So the captain, he thought, nah, there's nothing, I'm safe not being covered. But we didn't know that once a month, the architecture of the whole system is such that even though you haven't got it operational, once an hour, it will try and log on with the satellite, Inmarsat satellite, which is over the Northwest Indian Ocean. So using the time of back and forward and whatever, you're able to get a distance arc. And so, you know, the fifth arc is there, and then the sixth and the seventh. It gave a progression. And the distance between them at the ground speed, we knew the wind and everything else, and 777 normally cruises at Mach 0.84, we were able to work out a track. And the track was 188 degrees true. And we were pretty sure that is definitive, that the satellite arcs are absolutely it. Now, the interesting arc, the famous one, the seventh arc, is the one where you've got your burst frequency offset, burst timing offset. One, it measures in the horizontal plane, which basically gives you ground speed in a way. But there was a sudden increase in the vertical plane, a Doppler shift. And that sudden Doppler shift is indication of a rapid descent. Now, the other thing is, I fly a large corporate jet, for example, and if you have a dual engine flame out 35,000 feet, the first immediate action memory item is stick the nose down 20 degrees to conserve energy. Well, 20 degrees at Mach 0.84 equates to about 15,000 feet a minute. So it could be that the captain had run out of fuel and suddenly stuck the nose down to save energy, and then as he passed 30,000 feet, convert to a glide. That could explain that, but we don't know. All we know is he passed the seventh arc. There was a vertical shift in Doppler shift in the vertical plane, and that's where we think he entered a hold around the 30 degrees south area, waiting for daylight so he could do a successful ditching. But I just mentioned, I get my information from Airline News. It's run by Jeffrey Thomas. It appears on YouTube. He really gets up-to-date information. He's world famous. So, and he's linked with this aerospace engineer who's brilliant, Richard Godfrey of Frankfurt. And I follow these two. and along with my colleagues behind me, who are all professional pilots,
I had asked this to other guests and also another captain, very famous investigator, whose episode airs 2 weeks after you. I asked him how efficient were the government agencies, Malaysian, American, or Australian. I was not aware of the Saudi government. How efficient were they in doing their investigation for MH370? And he said they could have not done it better. He was fully satisfied, and his theory is also the pilot murder suicide, as per the investigation they concluded. Same question to you. Do you think these agencies have failed the families, or do you think they have done the right thing or are doing the right
thing? Three entities there. First, the American government. I think they just need to protect their top secret stuff and don't want to be involved. In December 2019, I was invited by Boeing over to Seattle, reference the 737 MAX, because I was writing about it in the journals. I flew the 737 MAX with simulator with their chief test pilot. I happened to ask the head of Boeing, with the crowded room full of journalists, what was going on with the search for MH370? How was Boeing involved? And all he could say was, oh, well, we're liaising with the regulatory authorities. And I yelled out, but the Australian government doesn't want it found. And he kind of went very silent. But I think the Americans are not really involved in any way. Malaysian government, they just handed everything to the Australian government to do it. And yeah, they've had their fingers crossed, hoping, I think, that it's not found. The Australian government is my target, and it was Ian Higgins' target. They had the responsibility to do things openly and honestly. They've wasted hundreds of millions of dollars on what we regard as a false search. And we, myself and other colleagues and lawyers, we had questions put in what's called Senate estimates. It's like in America, a congressional inquiry that periodically happens. And the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, all they sent was a marine engineer called Martin Dolly. Now, this guy, he knows nothing about aviation. He thought with dead pilots over the South China Sea and the autopilot disconnected for some reason, the plane could meander by itself without autopilot for 7 hours on. I mean, that's the level of his intelligence when it comes to aviation stuff. So when the questions that we had put, one of the senators had been briefed what we wanted, the questions were put in Senate estimates, and these guys floundered around and couldn't answer anything. It was just a waste of time. So I wrote in the Australian 2015, there should be a royal commission into the conduct of the Australian government and the Australian Transport Safety Bureau into the conduct of the search. And while I'm at it, the head of CASA, Civil Aviation Safety Authority, the search had been changed. Now, my colleague told me that he was with Warren Truss, the Deputy Prime Minister at the start, and the aviation expert from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, that they had planned the search based on a pilot glide. But when it happened, it suddenly was because of an event over South China Sea that terminated the pilot and became a ghost flight, which meant the search then wasn't based on solid sort of theory and logic, but just on a nonsense, ludicrous ghost flight. So, yeah, I demanded in the Australian 2015 to be a royal commission. I'm still waiting. And I'm going to, once I retire, I'm going to push again.
Wow. Final question, Captain Byron. Okay, we had Grace Nathan and K.S. Narendran on the show, whose family members were on the MH370. And I have so much sympathy for them, and I can not even understand the pain and suffering they have gone through over the last 12 years due to the lack of closure and not even finding the body of their loved ones. What is one message you want to say to people like them, and there were, besides Chinese, there were also some few Australian people as well. What is your message to these family members who are still waiting to just know the answers? That's it, you know?
Well, up until a couple of years ago, I was regularly emailing MH370 families, keeping them in the loop as to what we were doing with my little international pilots group. MH370 must be found. You know, decency, humanity, everything demands. You can't let a huge airline at 64 meters long, 215 feet or whatever, you can't just let it go. The Malaysian foreign minister said, I think in 2018, oh, we should just let it go now and move on. No, it must be found. We can't let the history just become legend, become myth. It mustn't happen. So there's guys like me, we're just going to keep pressing. The search must, well, we're very disappointed with the fact that the most recent search in February of this year only lasted 27 days, and they didn't search the Whisper area that's been identified by Jeffrey Thomas in liaison with Richard Godfrey. And we're pretty certain, very high probability that's where it is, but it must be found. So it just needs the will. The Australian government has got the will because they'd be embarrassed. The Malaysian government hasn't got the will because, you know, there's money and motive and image of, yeah. I lived in Malaysia for 2 years, so I know the country very well, and the Middle East for 15 years. So I know this whole scene very well.
Captain Byron, one thing, I know when we had Captain Nick Ruslan, he was very adamant and upset with the Malaysian authorities. He said, why would they not put even a single Malaysian authority figure on the Ocean Infinity search vessel? That was his point.
Good point. Yeah.
So you also tend to agree on that, You tend to agree with his statement that there should be at least someone representing the authority from the country where the airline belonged to whom the airline belonged to.
I would love Ocean Infinity to invite me along on the search. We could have real-time satellite sort of thing on how it's progressing. Because when the search goes, you know, they go out there, there's very little information coming out. It could have been found. We just don't know. No one's telling us anything. It's hush-hush. So I don't know. There'll be a movie made one day. I hope it's made before I hit the bucket, but yeah.
Wow. Thank you very much for taking the time to be on the show, for accepting the invite. And, you know, my message to the audience is to please share this episode because by doing so, you ensure this story and the 239 souls it represents are never truly lost to the deep. You know, Captain Byron, if you have any final message for our audience, please take it away.
Yes, well, the aviation industry cannot let this pass. I'm just so surprised that ICAO and even the FAA in America, they're so powerful. Why they're not standing up and saying, this must be found. So I think there's a lot of political skullduggery going on behind the scenes at the moment, and maybe